Leo traced the worn, creased spine of his father's Bible. It was the only thing that still smelled of him, a faint, clean scent of sawdust, linseed oil, and old paper. Arthur Hale had been a carpenter, a man who spoke more with his hands than his mouth, and this heavy, leather-bound book had been his constant companion. It sat on his workbench, a silent witness to a lifetime of shaping wood, and on his nightstand the final object his eyes saw before sleep. Now in the quiet, dust-moated stillness of his father's empty house, it was all Leo had left. His wife Clara had called the house a hovel, a depressing little box that needed to be cleared out and sold before it rotted into the ground. She hadn't come with him today. She said the smell of poverty gave her a headache. He opened the cover. The pages, thin as insect wings, whispered as they turned. His father's handwriting, a strong, surprisingly elegant script, filled the margins with notes, questions, and affirmations. It was a map of a good man's soul. Tucked between the lamentations of Jeremiah and the visions of Ezekiel was a small, folded piece of paper. It was thin and slightly glossy, aged to the color of weak tea. Leo carefully unfolded it. It was an old lottery ticket, the numbers printed in a faded blue ink. 04, 16, 18, 22, 38, 45. Below them, a date was stamped, more than 20 years ago. A faint smile touched Leo's lips. His father, a man of profound faith and practicality, had never once mentioned playing the lottery. It seemed so out of character. A tiny, secret flutter of hope for a windfall he never received. It was a poignant symbol of a life lived with quiet dignity and perhaps a single, hidden dream of escape. He thought his father was content. Maybe, Leo now considered, he was just resilient. The ticket was worthless, of course, a ghost of a forgotten Tuesday night drawing, but to Leo it felt like a treasure, a small human secret from a man he thought he knew completely. He carefully folded it and slipped it into his wallet, a tangible piece of his father's private life. Within a week, that worthless piece of paper would detonate a bomb in the heart of his own life, revealing a truth far more devastating than any financial loss. His family thought they knew him. They saw a quiet architect, a man of modest success married into their orbit of wealth and influence. They didn't know the foundation he was built upon. They were about to find out that the quietest men often have the strongest blueprints. It's funny how a small thing can change everything, isn't it? A forgotten piece of paper, a quiet word, a moment of decision. I bet many of you watching have had moments like that in your own lives. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from today. It's always incredible to see how far these stories travel. And if you enjoy stories about hidden strength and seeing arrogance get what it deserves, please consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. Your support makes it all possible. Now let's get back to that little slip of paper and the storm it was about to unleash. The first tremor of the earthquake arrived that evening. Leo was sitting in the living room of the home he shared with Clara, a space that always felt more like her territory than theirs. It was a symphony of beige and chrome, minimalist to the point of being sterile, curated by an interior designer her mother, Eleanor, had recommended. Every object had a price tag that far exceeded its emotional value. Leo felt like a guest, a temporary resident in a high-end hotel suite. He pulled the lottery ticket from his wallet, looking at the faded numbers under the cold, recessed lighting. Clara swept into the room, a glass of chilled white wine in her hand. Her movements were always precise, economical, as if she were conserving energy for a more important event. She glanced at the ticket in his hand, her perfectly sculpted eyebrow arching in disdain. "What's that?" "Something I found in my dad's Bible," Leo said, his voice softer than he intended. She leaned in, her expensive perfume eclipsing the faint, imagined scent of sawdust. A short, sharp laugh escaped her lips. "A lottery ticket? Oh, that's tragically perfect. Let me guess, he was one number off from $1 million his whole life? It's the kind of story people like him tell themselves." The phrase, people like him, landed like a stone in his gut. It was a phrase she and her family used often, a casual brand to separate their world from his. I just thought it was interesting, Leo said, folding the paper. I never knew he played. Of course he did, Clara said, taking a sip of wine. It's the tax on the desperate, a little weekly fantasy to distract from from the reality of it all. She waved a dismissive hand, a gesture meant to encompass his father's entire existence, the small house, the calloused hands, the simple, honorable life. Leo felt a familiar heat rise in his chest, a dull anger he had learned to swallow over the 8 years of their marriage. My father wasn't desperate, Clara. He was content. Leo, darling, don't be naive, she sighed, settling onto the edge of a chair that looked more like a sculpture than a piece of furniture. Contentment is a consolation prize for those who can't achieve success. My father always says that. Her father, Richard Vance, was a man who measured the world in square footage and profit margins. He was a property developer who had inherited a significant fortune and leveraged it into a commercial real estate empire. He treated Leo with a kind of patronizing amusement, as if he were a curious pet Clara had brought home. Your father also says a man's worth is on his balance sheet, Leo replied, his voice quiet but firm. I don't agree. Well, you wouldn't, she said, and the implied insult was as clear as if she had shouted it. You wouldn't agree because your balance sheet is negligible. The conversation was over. She finished her wine, stood up, and announced she was going to have a bath. The lottery ticket and the man it had belonged to were dismissed, forgotten, relegated to the category of quaint, lower-class trivia. Leo sat alone in the silent, expensive room, the small paper feeling heavier now in his pocket. It was no longer just a curiosity. It was a symbol of the vast, unbridgeable canyon that ran through the center of his marriage. He had tried to ignore it for years, building flimsy bridges of compromise and silence, but the ground was starting to shake. The following Sunday was the obligatory family dinner at the Vance estate. It was a sprawling neo-Georgian mansion that seemed designed to intimidate the landscape into submission. Dinner was always a formal affair, a stage for Richard and Eleanor to perform their status. Leo had long ago learned his role, to be seen and not heard, to nod at Richard's pronouncements, and to absorb Eleanor's passive-aggressive critiques of his career, his clothes, and his general lack of dynastic ambition. The evening started, as it often did, with Richard holding court at the head of the polished mahogany table. He was recounting a story about a rival developer who had made a catastrophic error, a tale he told with the undisguised glee of a predator watching another animal stumble. Eleanor, draped in silk and diamonds, provided a chorus of agreement, her laughter as sharp and brittle as ice. Clara, eager to contribute some amusement to the proceedings, chose her moment. Oh, Daddy, you'll love this. Leo found the most fascinating little artifact while cleaning out his father's house. Richard paused, a forkful of seared scallop halfway to his mouth. An artifact? Don't tell me. A hand-carved rocking chair that's been in the family for generations? The joke was obvious. Leo's family had no generations of wealth to pass down. Even better, Clara said, her eyes twinkling with malice. A lottery ticket, an old losing one, of course, tucked away in his Bible, of all places. Can you imagine the piety and the desperation, all in one book? Richard let out a booming laugh that echoed in the cavernous dining room. In his Bible? That is rich. Praying for the numbers to come up, I suppose. Arthur Hale, a good, simple man, God rest his soul, but not exactly a visionary, was he? He built his own house, Leo said, his voice level. He refused to let them see the sting. He built a business from nothing. I'd call that visionary. Oh, a business, Leo, please, Eleanor sniffed, dabbing her lips with a linen napkin. It was a workshop. Let's not aggrandize it. He fixed things for people. It was honest work, I'm sure, but it's not what one builds a legacy on. And what is? Leo asked, the question hanging in the air. Richard set his fork down and leaned forward, his eyes locking onto Leo's. The performative bonhomie vanished, replaced by a cold, reptilian focus. A legacy, Leo, is something you leave behind that grows. It's land, it's assets, it's a name that opens doors. Your father left you a dusty house and a losing lottery ticket. I will leave Clara and our grandchildren an empire. That is the difference. He then reached into his wallet, pulled out a crisp $100 bill, and slid it across the table toward Leo. Here, go buy a few more dreams on me. Frame one if it makes you feel better. The humiliation was absolute, a deliberate and public castration. Clara didn't defend him. She looked down at her plate, a small, complicit smile on her face. This was her family's sport, Leo baiting, and she was a loyal member of the team. The air grew thick with Leo's silence. He looked at the $100 bill, then at Richard's smug face, at Eleanor's condescending pity, and finally at his wife, who refused to meet his gaze. He felt something shift inside him, a tectonic plate of long-suppressed resentment grinding into place. He didn't take the money. He simply nodded, a slow, deliberate motion. "Thank you for the offer, Richard," he said, his voice unnervingly calm. "But I think I'll hold on to my father's ticket. It seems to have more value than you can imagine." The comment was cryptic enough to be dismissed as sour grapes. Richard chuckled and picked up his fork. The moment of sport concluded. But Leo wasn't speaking to them anymore. He was making a promise to himself. He would find out what those numbers meant. Not for the money, but for his father. For Arthur Hale, the man who built things that lasted, the man they thought they could so easily tear down. The dinner continued, the conversation flowing around him like a river, but Leo was no longer there. He was in his father's workshop, the scent of sawdust in the air, studying a blueprint no one else could see. In the days that followed, the lottery ticket became a private obsession. It was a puzzle bequeathed to him by his father, and solving it felt like the most important work of his life. The humiliation at the dinner table had not broken him. It had forged him. It had burned away the last vestiges of his hope that Clara's family would ever see him as anything more than a disappointing accessory. Their cruelty had given him a strange kind of freedom, the freedom of a man with nothing left to lose in their eyes. He started not with the state lottery commission, but with a different set of numbers, dates. His father was a meticulous man. The date on the ticket had to mean something. He cross-referenced it with his father's old journals, spiral-bound notebooks filled with work logs, measurements, and the occasional personal reflection. On the date stamped on the ticket, 20 years prior, he found a simple entry. Met with Harrison, finalized the plan. The seeds are planted. Now we wait for the rain. Harrison. The name rang a distant bell. Mr. Harrison had been his father's lawyer, a kind, elderly man who had handled the simple will. Leo had met him briefly after the funeral. He'd seemed like a small-town solicitor, competent but unremarkable, the kind of lawyer a carpenter would have. Leo had his card somewhere. The phrase, "the seeds are planted," resonated with him. His father had been a keen gardener, but this felt different, more metaphorical. It felt like a plan. He spent his evenings in his home office, the one room in the house he'd been allowed to furnish himself. It was filled with books on architectural history, drafting tools, and models of his past projects. It was his sanctuary. While Clara watched reality television shows about fabulously wealthy people living vacuous lives, Leo delved into public records. He started with the county assessor's office, using their online portal. He typed the first two numbers from the ticket, 04 and 16, into the search field for parcel numbers. It was a long shot, a complete guess. He hit enter. The system returned hundreds of results. It was a fool's errand. He leaned back, frustrated. What was he even looking for? His father owned his house and the small parcel of land it sat on. That was it. He was chasing a ghost, fueled by pride. He was about to close the laptop when his eyes caught the name Harrison again, this time in an old email from the will reading. The firm's name was Harrison and Associates, Land Use and Zoning Law. Not general practice, land use. A new thought began to form, a wild, improbable hypothesis. He looked at the ticket again, 041618223845. What if they weren't lottery numbers? What if they were code? His father loved ciphers and puzzles, a little-known quirk of his personality. He used to create treasure hunts for Leo as a boy, with clues hidden in plain sight. Leo pulled up the zoning maps for the rural county just north of the city, an area that had been mostly farmland and scrub for decades, but was now on the bleeding edge of suburban expansion. It was the same area where Richard Vance's company was planning its most ambitious project yet, a massive mixed-use development called Vance Summit. Richard had been boasting about it for months, about how he was consolidating hundreds of small parcels, a complex and brilliant strategy that would make him a legend. Leo started searching again, this time with more focus. He looked at the parcel maps for the Vance Summit area. They were a patchwork quilt of different owners, many of them holding the land for generations. He searched for his father's name, Arthur Hale. Nothing. He searched for Harrison. Nothing. He was at another dead end. Defeated, he closed his eyes and tried to think like his father. Look at what's right in front of you. The answer is usually the simplest one. The numbers. 04, 16, 18, 22, 38, 45. What if they were sequential? Parcel 4, Lot 16. Parcel 18, Lot 22. Parcel 38, Lot 45. He typed the first combination into the county registry search. Parcel 04, Lot 16. He hit enter. A record appeared. Owner, the Northwood Trustee Corporation. Registered agent, William Harrison. Leo's heart began to hammer against his ribs. He typed in the next pair. Parcel 18, Lot 22. Owner, the Northwood Trustee Corporation. He did the third. Parcel 38, Lot 45. The same. A shell corporation registered by his father's lawyer 20 years ago. He pulled up the master map of the Vance Summit development, a public-facing marketing tool on Richard's company website. It showed the entire plan layout, the retail center, the luxury condos, the manicured parks. Then he cross-referenced the parcels owned by the Northwood Trustee Corporation. He highlighted them one by one on the map. Parcel 04-16 was a small, unassuming square of land right in the middle of the proposed retail hub. Parcel 18-22 was a long, thin strip that cut directly across the only viable access route from the main highway. And parcel 38-45, his breath caught in his throat. It was a large, central plot, the highest point of elevation on the entire site. The very spot designated on the map as the Summit, where the most exclusive multi-million-dollar estate homes were planned. They weren't just random plots of land. They were strategic. They were kill shots. Without them, the entire development was impossible. The roads couldn't be built. The retail hub was bisected. The premier real estate was a hole in the middle of the plan. His father, the humble carpenter, the man with no vision, had quietly, patiently, and brilliantly checkmated Richard Vance 2 decades before Richard even knew they were playing a game. The seeds had been planted, and now, after 20 years of patient waiting, the rain was finally coming. Leo looked at the faded lottery ticket, no longer a symbol of desperate hope, but a testament to profound foresight. The numbers weren't a prayer for $1 million. They were the keys to an empire. The knowledge settled over Leo not with a jolt of excitement, but with a deep, quiet calm. It was the calm of a man who suddenly understands the full weight of his inheritance. It wasn't just the land, it was the legacy of his father's character. Arthur Hale had been underestimated his entire life, dismissed by men like Richard Vance as a simple laborer. But all along he had been playing a longer, smarter game. He hadn't bought the land out of spite. Leo knew his father better than that. He had bought it as an investment, a smart, calculated risk based on his understanding of how cities grow. He saw the future in a way the Vances, blinded by their own arrogance, never could. He had turned the sweat of his brow into something that would last, something that would provide for his son. The irony was devastatingly poetic. The very man whose legacy Richard had mocked was now the silent architect of his potential ruin. Leo called Mr. Harrison the next morning. The old lawyer's voice was warm and kind, but when Leo mentioned the Northwood Trustee Corporation, a new note of professional caution entered his tone. "That is a matter of some confidentiality, Leo. May I ask how you came to know of it?" "My father left me a note," Leo said, choosing his words carefully. "A series of numbers, 04, 16, 18, 22, 38, 45. There was a long pause on the other end of the line, then a soft chuckle. "Arthur, that clever old fox, a treasure hunt from beyond the grave. Of course he would. Your father, Leo, was one of the shrewdest men I have ever known. He had an artist's soul and an accountant's mind, a rare combination." They agreed to meet. The next day, Leo sat in Mr. Harrison's office, a comfortable, book-lined room that smelled of leather and justice. The lawyer laid out the documents, the original deeds, the incorporation papers for Northwood Trustee, and the trust agreement. It was all there, in black and white. Arthur Hale was the sole beneficiary of the trust, and upon his death, the sole beneficiary became his son, Leo Hale. "Your father bought these parcels over a period of 5 years," Mr. Harrison explained, his fingertips resting on a stack of deeds. "He used the profits from his carpentry business. He lived frugally, as you know. He saw the way the city was expanding. He used to say, 'They're not making any more of it, William.' He was talking about land. He knew that one day this sleepy farmland would be worth a fortune." "Did he know about Richard Vance's plans?" Leo asked. "Not specifically about Vance," Harrison replied, "but he knew someone like Vance would come along eventually, someone with a grand vision who needed what he had. The trust was set up to protect the assets and to ensure they passed to you seamlessly. Your father was very clear. He wanted this to be your security, your independence." The lawyer leaned forward, his expression serious. "He also knew the kind of family you had married into, Leo. He worried. He said they were the kind of people who saw value, but not worth. He wanted you to have something that was entirely your own, something they couldn't touch or belittle." Leo felt a wave of emotion so powerful it almost took his breath away. It was love, fierce and profound, for the quiet, unassuming man who had seen everything, understood everything, and planned for everything. His father hadn't just left him land. He had left him a shield, a weapon, a choice. For the next 2 weeks, Leo lived a bifurcated life. Outwardly, nothing changed. He went to his architectural firm, he sketched designs, he attended meetings. At home, he endured the cool dismissiveness of Clara and the casual barbs of her family. The lottery ticket had become a running joke. Eleanor would ask him if he'd checked his numbers yet. Richard sent him a link to an article about a janitor who'd won $100 million, with the subject line, "Inspiration." They were watering a plant with gasoline, oblivious to the fact that they were standing in a puddle of it. Inside, Leo was a different man. He was studying. With Mr. Harrison's guidance, he was learning everything about the Vance Summit project. He read the zoning applications, the environmental impact reports, the market analyses. He learned that Richard had already sunk millions into planning, permits, and acquiring the surrounding, less crucial parcels. He was leveraged to the hilt, having bet his entire company on the success of this one development. He was a giant, marching confidently forward, completely unaware that a humble carpenter's son now controlled the ground beneath his feet. Leo began to feel a strange, cold sense of power. It wasn't about the money, though the figures Mr. Harrison had quoted were astronomical. It was about the impending collision of perception and reality. The Vances lived in a world built on the perception of their own superiority. That perception was about to be demolished, and Leo was holding the detonator. He planned the moment with the precision of an architect designing a load-bearing wall. It had to be perfect. It had to be on their turf, in their cathedral of arrogance, the formal dining room where he had been so thoroughly humiliated. He just needed to wait for the right occasion. The occasion presented itself a week later. Clara announced that her father was hosting a celebratory dinner. He had, after a long and arduous negotiation, finally secured the last of the major parcels he needed for Vance Summit. Or so he thought. "He's ecstatic," Clara said, barely looking up from her tablet. "He outmaneuvered Consolidated Holdings for the old Miller farm. It was the final piece of the puzzle. Now it's all systems go. You should probably wear your good suit. It's a big night for Daddy." "The final piece of the puzzle," Leo repeated softly. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." The night of the dinner party was a grand affair. The Vance mansion was ablaze with lights, and the dining room was filled with Richard's inner circle. Bankers, city council members, sycophantic business partners. The mood was triumphant. Champagne flowed freely. Richard stood at the head of the table, a veritable Roman emperor celebrating a conquest. "To Vance Summit," he toasted, raising his glass. "A project they said was too complex, too ambitious. They said I could never assemble the land. But we did it. We are building the future." A round of applause and murmurs of "Hear, hear," and "To Richard" followed. Throughout the meal, Richard regaled the table with the story of his victory, a self-aggrandizing epic of his own brilliance and tenacity. Leo ate quietly, a model of supportive silence. He watched Clara, saw the pride in her eyes as she looked at her father, the unquestioning belief in his power. He felt a pang of sadness for the woman he had once loved, a woman so thoroughly indoctrinated into her father's creed of wealth and status that she had no room for anything else. Finally, as dessert was being served, Richard's gaze fell upon Leo. A cruel, playful smile spread across his face. He was feeling magnanimous in his victory and decided a little more sport was in order. "Leo," he boomed, commanding the attention of the entire table. "We're all celebrating our good fortune tonight. It seems only fair to check in on yours. How is that lottery ticket from your father holding up? Have you checked the numbers yet? Who knows, maybe we can both be winners tonight." The table chuckled. Clara shot Leo a look that was part embarrassment, part warning. "Just play along. Don't make a scene." Leo looked at Richard, his expression perfectly placid. He slowly wiped his mouth with his napkin, folded it, and placed it on the table. The quiet deliberateness of the gesture drew the room's focus. "You know, Richard," he said, his voice calm and clear, carrying easily in the sudden silence. "You're right. Tonight is the perfect night to finally check those numbers." He reached into his jacket pocket. Everyone expected him to pull out the tattered ticket. Instead, he brought out his phone. The mood at the table shifted slightly. This was not following the script. "I've had them for a while now," Leo continued, his eyes not leaving Richard's. "I've just been waiting for the right moment to share the results." He tapped the screen of his phone. He didn't open a lottery app. He opened a PDF viewer, displaying a high-resolution map of the county. The area encompassing the Vance Summit project was clearly visible. "The numbers," Leo said, his voice as steady as a surgeon's hand, "are 0, 4, 16, 18, 22, 38, 45. I assumed, like you, that they were for a lottery, a game of chance. But my father was not a gambler. He was a planner." He zoomed in on the map. He tapped a small square parcel in the center of the planned retail district, and a box of information popped up. The first numbers, 0, 4, and 16, correspond to parcel 04, lot 16. It's owned by a small company called the Northwood Trustee Corporation. It seems to be right where your anchor department store is supposed to go." A nervous titter went through the room. Richard's smile was gone, replaced by a tight, confused frown. "What is this, Leo? Some kind of joke?" Leo ignored him. He swiped on the screen, moving to a long, narrow strip of land. The next numbers, 18 and 22, correspond to parcel 18, lot 22. This one is critical. It controls all 1,000 feet of frontage along the highway. Without it, there is no entrance to your development, no way in and no way out. The silence in the room was now absolute. The air was thick with tension. The bankers were leaning forward, their faces pale. Clara was staring at Leo, her mouth slightly agape, a look of utter disbelief on her face. "And finally," Leo said, his voice dropping slightly, becoming softer, more deliberate. He zoomed in on the highest point of the development, the crest of the hill that gave Vance Summit its name. The final numbers, 38 and 45. Parcel 38, lot 45. The summit itself. The land on which you plan to build your most expensive homes. The jewel in your crown. He paused, letting the weight of the moment settle. He looked directly at Richard, whose face had gone from ruddy and triumphant to a waxy, ashen gray. "My father, the simple carpenter, bought these 3 parcels of land 20 years ago," Leo said, delivering the final, devastating sentence. "He placed them in a trust, the Northwood Trustee Corporation. Upon his death, the sole beneficiary of that trust is me." The statement landed, simple, devastating, final. For a few seconds, the only sound was the faint hum of the air conditioning. It was as if a vacuum had sucked all the oxygen and arrogance out of the room. Richard Vance stared at Leo, his mind clearly struggling to process the information. It was impossible. It was absurd. The quiet, pathetic man-child he had ridiculed for years could not possibly hold the fate of his entire empire in his hands. "You're lying," Richard finally rasped, his voice a dry whisper. "This is a pathetic stunt. You forged some documents trying to extort me." Leo didn't flinch. He simply shook his head slowly. "No lies, Richard. No forgeries." He looked down the table toward the front door of the dining room. "But you don't have to take my word for it." On cue, as prearranged, the Vance's butler appeared at the door. "Excuse me, Mr. Vance. There is a Mr. Harrison here to see Mr. Hale. He says it is urgent." "Let him in," Leo said calmly. Mr. Harrison entered, a distinguished, silver-haired figure carrying a leather briefcase. He walked with a quiet authority that immediately commanded respect. He nodded politely to the stunned faces at the table and then stood beside Leo. "Mr. Harrison," Leo said, his voice formal, "would you be so kind as to confirm the ownership status of the parcels we have been discussing?" The old lawyer opened his briefcase and produced a thick file. "Certainly, Leo," he said, his voice crisp and clear. "I am William Harrison, legal counsel for the Northwood Trustee Corporation and executor of the estate of Arthur Hale. I have here the certified deeds for parcels 04-16, 18-22, and 38-45. As of last month, following the passing of Mr. Hale, the sole controlling interest in the corporation and its assets was legally transferred to his son and sole heir, Mr. Leo Hale." He placed the file on the table with a soft, definitive thud. "The titles are clean, the taxes are current, and the ownership is unassailable. I have already taken the liberty of informing your legal team via courier this afternoon. I imagine they will be contacting you shortly." The sound of that file hitting the table was the sound of Richard Vance's world collapsing. The color drained completely from his face. He looked at the documents, then at Leo, his eyes wide with a mixture of hatred and horrified disbelief. The bankers were already whispering furiously to each other, their expressions grim. They understood the implications immediately. The project was dead. Not just delayed, but dead. Without those keystone parcels, The entire development was a worthless collection of disconnected farmland. Richard Vance wasn't just facing a setback, he was facing catastrophic financial ruin. Then Clara found her voice. It was not a voice of support for her husband. It was not a voice of shock or confusion. It was a voice sharp with accusation, dripping with a greed so naked and raw it was astonishing. "You knew?" she hissed, turning on Leo. Her face was a mask of fury. "You've known all this time? How much is it worth? How much money have you been hiding from me?" It was the question that ruined them. Not, "What does this mean for us?" or "Why didn't you tell me?" but "How much money have you been hiding from me?" In that single, reflexive question, she revealed everything. Her loyalty was not to him, her husband, but to the money she believed he had kept from her. She saw him not as a partner, but as a resource she had failed to properly exploit. Leo looked at his wife, and for the first time in years, he felt nothing but a profound and desolate pity. The love he had tried so hard to protect, the hope he had harbored that she would one day see him for who he was, all of it evaporated in the heat of her avarice. "The land has been valued at approximately $40 million, Leo said, his voice cold and devoid of emotion. He was no longer speaking to his wife. He was speaking to a stranger. "But you seem to be mistaken, Clara. I haven't been hiding any money from you, because it was never our money to begin with. It is my father's legacy. It is mine." He then turned his attention back to Richard, who was now slumped in his chair, looking like a man who had aged 20 years in 20 minutes. Eleanor was at his side, her face a frozen mask of horror, her hand clutching her pearls as if they were a life raft. Leo stood up. He felt a strange sense of calm, of clarity. The weight of years of silent endurance was lifting from his shoulders. He was finally breathing his own air. "You all saw a losing lottery ticket," he said, his voice ringing with a quiet power that filled the opulent room. He let his gaze travel over every stunned face at the table. "You saw the last pathetic dream of a poor, simple man. You mocked him. You mocked me. You offered me $100 of your pity." He paused, letting the memory of that humiliation hang in the air. "My father never played the lottery," he continued. "He didn't believe in luck. He believed in hard work, in patience, and in building things that last. He bought that land with money he earned with his own two hands, shaping wood in a dusty workshop you dismissed as insignificant. He saw the future, Richard. While you were busy building your name, he was quietly securing the ground you needed to build it on." He took a step back from the table, his movement signaling a finality that was terrifying to the Vances. "This was never about money for me," he said. "It was about respect, a respect you were never willing to give, to me or to his memory." He looked at Clara one last time. "You asked me what I was hiding. The truth is, I wasn't hiding anything. I was just waiting for you all to show me who you truly were. And you have, spectacularly." With that, he turned to Mr. Harrison. "I believe we are concluded here." "Indeed, Leo," the lawyer said, gathering his documents. As they walked toward the door, leaving a tableau of shattered arrogance in their wake, Richard Vance finally stirred. "Wait," he croaked, his voice desperate. "We can make a deal. Name your price, Leo. Name any price." Leo stopped at the doorway but didn't turn around. "The price," he said over his shoulder, "was decency. And you spent your last dollar of it a long time ago." He walked out of the house and didn't look back. The air outside was cool and clean, and for the first time in 8 years, he felt like he could finally breathe. The quiet man had spoken. The foundation had been tested, and the house of Vance, built on a bedrock of arrogance, had crumbled into dust. The aftermath was swift and brutal. The news of the Vance Summit Project's collapse sent shockwaves through the city's financial community. The bankers at the dinner party, realizing their loans were secured against a now worthless project, called in their debts. Richard Vance's empire, leveraged to its absolute limit, imploded. He was forced into a fire sale of his other assets to cover the losses. His reputation as a visionary developer shattered overnight. The man who had boasted of leaving an empire for his grandchildren was now facing a legacy of debt and public disgrace. He became a ghost in his own city, his name a cautionary tale whispered at cocktail parties. Clara, predictably, went into a state of frantic damage control. She called Leo incessantly for the first 48 hours. The calls were a chaotic medley of threats, pleas, and furious accusations. She accused him of deliberately plotting to ruin her family. She begged him to reconsider, promising she could get her father to offer him a truly incredible deal. She wept, she screamed, she tried to seduce him with promises of a renewed marriage, one where he would finally be the man of the house. Leo listened to the first few voicemails with a kind of detached anthropological curiosity. It was fascinating, in a horrifying way, to hear the gears of her mind working, utterly incapable of grasping the core issue. She still thought it was about money and power. She couldn't comprehend that it was about character, integrity, and the memory of a good man. He never answered her calls. After 2 days, he blocked her number. His lawyer handled the rest. The divorce proceedings were remarkably uncomplicated. Clara's family, now fighting for their own financial survival, had no resources for a protracted legal battle. The prenuptial agreement they had insisted upon, designed to protect their assets from him, now ironically protected his assets from her. The house, which was in her name, was sold to pay off her father's creditors. Clara was forced to move back into the diminished Vance mansion with her broken parents, the three of them rattling around in the hollow shell of their former glory. Leo, meanwhile, moved into his father's small house. He spent weeks simply existing in the space, cleaning it, repairing the things that needed fixing, and sleeping in his childhood bedroom. He found he preferred the quiet simplicity of the little house to the sterile grandeur of the one he had shared with Clara. It was a home, not a showroom. It had history. It had soul. It smelled of sawdust. He met with Mr. Harrison to decide the fate of the land. Several developers, including the rival company Richard had crowed about beating, had come forward with massive offers. They were prepared to make Leo one of the wealthiest men in the state. He could have taken the highest bid, cashed out, and disappeared to a life of leisure. But that felt like a betrayal of his father's legacy. Arthur Hale hadn't acquired the land just for its monetary value. He had acquired it because he understood the worth of a place, of a community. Leo did something that baffled the city's real estate world. He turned down the most lucrative offers. Instead, he entered into a partnership with a nonprofit development group known for creating sustainable, community-focused projects. He sold them the land for significantly less than market value, with several conditions. Parcel 38 to 45, the Summit, was not to be developed at all. It was to be donated to the county and turned into a public park and nature preserve. It would be named Arthur's Overlook. The other 2 parcels would be used for a mixed-income housing development, with a portion of the units set aside as affordable housing for teachers, firefighters, and nurses, and a community center that would offer vocational training in the skilled trades, carpentry, plumbing, electrical work. It was an act of poetic justice. The land Richard Vance had intended for luxury condos and exclusive estates would now be a place for everyone. The Summit would not be a monument to one man's ego, but a shared space for families to gather. And the foundation of the new community would be built on the very principles the Vances had despised: inclusivity, service, and respect for honest work. Leo didn't maximize his profit, but he maximized his father's legacy. About 6 months after the divorce was finalized, Leo was at the site of Arthur's Overlook for the groundbreaking ceremony. It was a crisp autumn day, and the view from the hill was spectacular. You could see the entire city spread out below. He saw a figure standing at the edge of the crowd, partially hidden by a large oak tree. It was Clara. She looked different. Her expensive clothes seemed to hang off her, and the practiced confidence in her posture was gone. She looked hesitant, lost. After the ceremony, as the crowd began to disperse, she approached him. "Leo," she said, her voice quiet. "Clara." He felt no anger, no bitterness, just a hollow space where their shared history used to be. "The park. It's a beautiful idea," she said. "What you're doing here, it's good." "It's what my father would have wanted," he replied simply. She looked down at her hands. "I've had a lot of time to think. About everything. About that night." She looked up, and he saw a flicker of something genuine in her eyes, something beyond the calculation and the greed. It looked like regret. "You were right. I never understood. I never saw you. I just saw what my parents told me to see. A disappointment. A project to be fixed. I am so sorry, Leo. For everything." It was the apology he had once longed to hear. Now it felt like a postscript to a book he had already finished reading. "I believe you are sorry, Clara," he said, and he meant it. "You're sorry for how things turned out. But I need you to understand something. You weren't just wrong about me. You were wrong about my father. You were wrong about everything that matters." He could see the words hit her, could see the painful truth of them register. She had been a follower, a loyal daughter to a corrupt kingdom, and when the kingdom fell, she had nothing of her own to stand on. "Is there any chance? For us?" she asked, the question so faint it was almost carried away by the breeze. Leo thought for a moment, not out of indecision, but to find the kindest way to state the absolute. He thought of his father's Bible, of the quiet strength in its pages, of the legacy of integrity he was now charged with upholding. "My father taught me to build things on a strong foundation, Clara," he said gently. "Our foundation is gone. It was built on sand. I wish you well. I hope you find your own ground to build on." He turned and walked away, leaving her standing under the oak tree at the edge of the park that bore his father's name. He felt a profound sense of peace. He had honored his father. He had found his own worth, not in a bank account, but in his own actions. The faded lottery ticket was still in his wallet. He looked at it from time to time. It wasn't a reminder of the money or the victory. It was a reminder of a simple truth, that the greatest treasures are often hidden in plain sight, and true value is measured not by what you own, but by what you build, what you honor, and what you are willing to stand for. The story of Leo and his father's legacy is a powerful one, isn't it? It reminds us that appearances are often deceiving, and that true strength doesn't always announce itself with a loud voice. Sometimes it's quiet, patient, and built to last. It makes you wonder about the hidden strengths in the people around you and in yourself. What did you think of Leo's final decision about the land? Was it justice, or was it something more? I'd love to read your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for spending this time with us today. If you found this story meaningful, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel for more stories that dig deep into the heart of what it means to be human. We'll see you next time.